Hey guys, this is the MMA breakdown back with my predictions for UFC 192, Cormier versus Gustafsson. And before I get into those predictions, I'm going to quickly recap the last event, UFC 191. If you've been watching my videos, I've been doing this for the last couple of them. Hopefully you've gotten used to the routine, but I just show you how my picks went for the last event and my updated ranking on UFC Fantasy. So for UFC 191, I was 6 for 11, but still managed to move up from 719 to 675. You can verify my last ranking in my last video, my Nelson versus Barnett fight night predictions. I showed my ranking after the Saskatoon card, which was 719, so moved up. And as far as my picks went, picked Arlovsky. I thought Mir definitely won. I thought it was a huge robbery. I even tweeted out before they read the decision that Mir had won, and I recorded it like I had gotten that fight wrong. And then they read the decision, and I was shocked that Arlovsky won. But you pick who you think is going to win. And even though it was a robbery, Arlovsky walked away with the win. So I will offer no apologies for that. Lineker and Riggs. All right, so I do this just to be transparent so you guys can track my progress and, just see my ranking after every event and see how my picks turned out. All right, and now let's get into the predictions. All right, UFC 192, Cormier versus Gustafsson, taking place October 3rd in Houston, Texas. And I like the Texas cards. They've been doing this for the last few years, or at least a couple years ago. They had the October event in Houston. And Texas, to me, it's kind of like the poor man's Vegas. You still have that kind of showbiz atmosphere. You got the big oil money down in Texas. I don't know. I like the feel of these Texas cards. But the pay-per-view card I think is pretty strong. If I'm being picky, the two opening fights, Jordan Magomedov and Pena, I don't think are quite pay-per-view level. But it doesn't bother me too much because those top three fights I think are really good. You have name guys, really relevant guys. The title fight is really good, and Hendricks and Woodley, that's a number one contender fight. And you have the return of Rashad Evans. But the prelim card I think is really being overlooked by fans. This thing is stacked. 4 fights on Fox Sports 1 and 4 fights on Fight Pass, but tons of great matchups, really relevant guys. You have Benavidez, Bagautinov in the headlining slot. That should definitely be on the main card, but they always have to stick a big fight there. But not just that fight. A lot of guys on the come up. Yair Rodriguez, Albert Tumenov, Rose Namajunas, Islam Makhachev on the Fight Pass. Really ecstatic about this prelim card. I usually trash the prelim cards for a lot of the FS1 and Fight Pass events, but this is fantastic. Love it. All right, so let's get into my predictions. And of course, as always, follow me on Twitter. My link is in the description. I always live tweet during fights. I post my predictions on UFC Fantasy there before and after the event, so follow me on Twitter. All right. But starting off with the Fight Pass prelim card at lightweight, Francisco Trevino versus Sage Northcutt. Northcutt's a newcomer, and I don't know anything about him. Trevino, really haven't been impressed with him in his 2 fights so far, and has been really inactive. His first fight against Tennec Forch, which he won, that was back in 2013, I believe, and then didn't fight until this past summer. So like a 2-year layoff, more than 2 years between fights. But his fight against Forch, I thought he just looked very average. Won the fight, outstruck him, but didn't do a whole lot other than scoring points. Didn't mix in takedowns or anything. Just kind of jabbed his way to a victory without showing much else. And then against Johnny Case, again, didn't impress me at all. Not only did he poke Case in the eye, and Case could only fight with one eye for the whole fight, but he got out-wrestled badly, was taken down at will over and over again, and then he was gesturing a lot, kind of shrugging off anything Case would do to him when he was clearly dominating him. And then after the fight, paraded around the cage like he had won. So that attitude combined with very mediocre-looking performances, I don't think he's really going to do anything significant in the UFC, but I have no idea who's going to win this fight because I don't know anything about Northcutt. All right, next up at heavyweight, Derek Lewis versus Victor Pesta. This is a real fun matchup. But Derek Lewis started his UFC career off with a couple of really brutal first-round knockouts, and they were fun, but since then, he's really been exposed as a guy who is only a slugger, only has a puncher's chance, and just has not been improving at all, and he's not a high-level fighter. He's not an improving fighter. So I think Victor Pesta, I think this is his fight to lose. Pesta, his thing is wrestling. Lost his first fight to Ruslan Magomedov, got dropped a few times, but his last fight against Konstantin Erikin, again, looked like he was going to get blown out of the water in the first round, but made the adjustments and grinded him out, was able to take him down at will from there, and won a decision that way. I think he's going to expose Lewis all day here with the wrestling. You saw in 2 fights ago, Lewis against Ruin Potts, he would get him on the ground on several occasions and started to pound away, and Potts would attempt heel hooks, knee bars, things like that, and it totally just disrupted Lewis. He had to scramble out of there like a madman. And the fight against the knockout losses Dimitrione and Sean Jordan, where he was just completely schooled. It's very revealing that the guy is not a very skilled striker. He has big power, but isn't good enough to compete with these guys. If it stays on the feet, of course, I think Lewis could knock him out, but I really think Pesta is going to be persistent with that takedown, get him down, and grind him out. So going with Pesta for the decision. All right, next up at flyweight, Chris Cariaso versus Sergio Pettis. I think this is the perfect matchup for both guys. I think it's a pretty tough fight to call. Sergio Pettis, I think, will have the skill advantage everywhere. I think that's pretty clear in his past fights. The guy's got a lot of talent, a lot of raw skill, very crisp technical striking. But the story with him is that he dominates fights, and at the last second, he has these moments where the tables completely turn, and he just, he loses the fight, gives the fight away, and he's not able to hold on till the end. The fights against his last fight against Ryan Benoit, I thought was identical to his fight against Caceres. He was just dominating, looking great with the striking. And then I think Benoit finished him in the 3rd round out of nowhere, just tagged him and knocked him out. And Caceres created a scramble at the end after getting dominated and was able to submit him. So Pettis, I think, a bit of a not a very trustworthy fighter, but Cariaso, he's been around for a long time, but never really had a breakout fight. His fight against Demetrius Johnson got dominated and submitted. He's not a good grappler, got submitted by Johnson, and got lay and prayed by Jussier Formiga for 3 rounds in a very ugly fight. Got finished by John Moraga. Anytime he's fought, the upper tier guys, hasn't been competitive at all. And the fights he has won at flyweight were not impressive. Danny Martinez, Louis Smolka, neither of those fights were dominant at all. He did enough to get by, but he's not a high-volume striker. And, that kind of slow-paced, point-sparring style of fighting, that's Pettis' game. Pettis can win like that. Yatsen Mesa barely, that was a very slow-paced fight, did not throw a lot of strikes, but was in control the whole time. I think Pettis can, win the kickboxing battle here, but, again, he has those those lapses where everything falls apart for him. But I do think Pettis will have the skill advantage, so going with Pettis for a decision. All right, next up at lightweight, Islam Makhachev versus Adriano Martins. Everyone got real excited about Makhachev after his last win, his debut performance over Leo Kuntz. And I thought he looked good, let his hands go, took him down, was able to get the back and submit him. But people were already comparing him to Nurmagomedov, and I thought that was completely inappropriate. Again, he looked good, but he's going to have to fight some better guys before I start giving him that kind of praise. And Leo Kuntz, the way he went down, to me didn't seem like any kind of real measuring stick. But again, looked talented. Adriano Martins, though, an underrated fighter, has kind of been flying under the radar, one of the last guys to come over from Strikeforce, but I actually like him to win this fight. I think he's really proven himself as a very good three-dimensional fighter, kind of a rare type these days. He's got real good boxing, was competitive with Cerrone before getting knocked out, has a couple of big knockouts of his own. One against Juan Puig, but knocked Darren Cruikshank down twice in that fight, not even with big shots, but just straight punches, and submitted Cruikshank. And then his last fight against Rustam Khabilov was able to win the wrestling battle. That was a very uneventful fight, but still was able to get the takedown and hold down Khabilov, who I thought was a proven talent by that point. I expected him to win that fight, but Martins is solid everywhere. Has the UFC experience, has big power on his feet, great submission game, good wrestler. If Makhachev is going to be the next Nurmagomedov, if he pulls out this win, I'll be a believer. But I just can't do it from that win over Kuntz to beat a guy who's looked very solid in Martins. So going with Martins, but I do think it could be really competitive. I just think Martins we've seen more and hasn't showed many holes in this game. So Martins. All right, next up, the Fox Sports 1 prelim card. First fight, women's strawweight bout, Rose Namajunas versus Angela Hill. This, to me, should be a cakewalk for Namajunas. I just think, she is the way more dynamic striker. She had a lot of finishes on tough. Submitted a couple of people with Kimuras from her back. She's a really aggressive submission artist, and on the feet, that unorthodox striking is really effective for her. Went down to Carla Esparza, but Angela Hill doesn't have the wrestling to give her those kinds of problems. And Hill, I thought she looked good against Emily Kagan in her fight after Tough in the finale. Almost came close to finishing her and just really beat her up. But then her last fight against Tisha Torres was not impressive. She looked very uncomfortable on the feet and didn't let her hands go. Was outstruck by Torres and taken down and held down. So Namajunas, I just think, is the better talent here. Hill's really raw and green, but just right now, I don't think she'll even come close to being competitive with Namajunas. I see Namajunas having a big advantage on the feet. With all of those unorthodox strikes, she has really good kicks from distance, and I think she's going to submit her. So Namajunas all the way. Next up at welterweight, Alan Jouban versus Albert Tumenov. This is a really great matchup. Probably the most underrated fight on the entire card, and a real important fight for both guys. The winner of this, I think, will really solidify themselves as a legit guy. Breaking towards the top 15, but I like Tumenov to win it. I think a lot of people are going to be picking Jouban, and his fights have been more fun. But that last fight against Matt Dwyer, and just do MMA math here. Look at Jouban's fight with Dwyer, which was a back and forth 3-round brawl where Jouban got too wild, left a lot of openings. He got hurt himself on a couple of occasions, and Albert Tumenov, who just pasted Dwyer, made him look like a can, crushed him with a head kick in the first round. I think it was only, I don't know if it was even 2 minutes, a really quick stoppage. Tumenov, I just think, will have a big technique advantage with the striking. He has some kind of, I think, a boxing background before MMA, but this guy's only loss was to Ildemar Alcantara, which is kind of crazy because he hasn't been doing too well lately at all. But he beat him with the wrestling. Other than that, Tumenov has dominated every guy on the feet, has pasted a couple of guys, Lapsley and Matt Dwyer, gotten them out of there real quick in the first round with brutal striking, big power. His last fight against Nico Musoke, thought he dropped the first round but made the adjustments and then proved to have the better boxing for rounds 2 and 3. Had better combinations, was going to the body. Tumenov is a high-level striker. Jouban, I think, can be more wild. He'll be willing to push the pace more, fight in the clinch. He has power himself. Finished Basinski, finished Richard Walsh with an elbow off of the clinch. But that last fight against Dwyer, who Tumenov already ran through, I just didn't think it was really a good performance for Jouban. I mean, looked good, was tough, stuck it out, but, it was back and forth and got caught a couple of times. That won't work against Tumenov. It's too high level of a striker, better combinations, a more diverse striking arsenal. Got to go with Tumenov here. I think he wins a decision. All right, at featherweight, Yair Rodriguez versus Dan Hooker. Go back to my predictions for UFC 180 a year ago where they had the finale fights from the first season of Tough Latin America and listen to my comments about Yair Rodriguez. I said this guy was a real special talent back then, and it took people. It took a while. Only after his last fight against Charles Rosa did people really catch on. But I watched Tough, and I go watch that video if you don't believe me. But I saw this guy as a star in the making. But Rodriguez versus Hooker. I have to go with Rodriguez. I haven't really been impressed with Hooker. His debut win over Entwistle was fun. Got a quick finish over a guy who just tried to knee bar him even while he was getting knocked out. But the fights against Blanco, Blanco was just able to stand in front of this guy and hammer him all day. It was just pot-shotting him, and it was an ugly fight for Hooker. And then his last fight against Hatsu Hioki was clearly getting outpointed. Again, clearly losing the fight, and really looked like he had no answer on the feet before he pulled out I think it was a head kick they knocked him out with, I believe, in the third round, but was well on his way to losing that fight as well. And Rodriguez, another really dynamic striker, kind of a new breed guy, but on Tough, had a submission win over a guy, had an inverted triangle at one point in the fight, was hurting guys with like spinning back fists and unorthodox moves like that. Rodriguez is a real talent. I just see him letting his hands go, using all of those unorthodox moves and styling on Hooker. I think he can get a finish. The last fight against Rosa, he was taken down, and some people even thought he lost the fight, but on the feet, he was clearly better. And Dan Hooker is not the wrestler that Rosa is, so I have to go with Rodriguez all the way. I think at the very least he wins a dominant decision, so going with Rodriguez. All right, next up at flyweight, Joseph Benavidez versus Ali Bagautinov. The return of Bagautinov, hasn't fought since June of last year when he lost to Demetrius Johnson. Had the drug test failure and was suspended, but Benavidez, this guy has a stellar resume. I think guys forget. Unfortunately, he's one of these guys that's always going to be number two or three in his division. I really would like to see him fight Dodson. That, I think, is the only meaningful matchup for him left, but it's clear that he's not going to be able to beat the champion. The only two guys he's lost to are Cruz and Demetrius Johnson, 2 losses to each guy, and that's why I say, go look at his resume. For those to be his only, 4 losses, but only 2 guys he's lost to, that's incredible, and everyone else he beats. All the other contenders who are at the top, all the guys on the rise, he just puts a stop to them. I think Bagautinov has a chance to out-wrestle him here. I mean, Benavidez is a great scrambler, really good at getting submissions in the scramble, loves that mounted guillotine. His striking is really wild, and I think it's really regressed since Ludwig left Team Alpha Male. When Ludwig was there, you saw him get a couple of really great finishes. Darren Oyenoyama, who's not, a top fighter, but finishing him with shots to the body. Putting down Jussier Formiga in the first round with the first shot he threw when it took Dodson 3 rounds to finish him. And since then, the fights against Dustin Ortiz, John Moraga, very wild striking, a lot of haymakers, overhands, and, both those guys were able to engage with him on the feet because he's just so wild and he brawls. He really doesn't seem to be as technical anymore. I think Bagautinov has the more refined striking, picks his shots better, more focus on straight punches. He has power too, but the layoff, and combined with this feeling that I have that Benavidez is just better than everyone in the division, just not good enough to be the champion, I think is going to be enough, or at least for me, gives me reason to pick Benavidez here. I don't see Benavidez being held down. I mean, he can scramble. I think Bagautinov just straight wrestling and takedowns might be better there. And on the feet, I think Benavidez is more aggressive, throws more volume. Bagautinov, could catch him. I think is more, has a more kind of level-headed striking game. But I just like Benavidez, man. I do. So I'm going to take Benavidez, but, that striking is pretty wild, and Bagautinov has shown power. I wouldn't be too surprised if he catches Benavidez, but I got to go with Benavidez. I think he's going to win the decision, just be a little better everywhere. Benavidez for the decision. All right, main card at women's bantamweight, Jessica Eye versus Juliana Pena. Big step up for Pena. I'm glad to see her get this opportunity. Definitely the best fighter she's fought in the UFC so far. Has only had 2 fights including her tough win over Jessica Rakoczy and Dudieva more recently. And both finishes were identical. She gets them down, gets top position, and just hammers them with Mark Munoz style ground and pound. I'm not saying she'll finish Jessica Eye, but I think she can get her in that position and score big there. Jessica Eye against Miesha Tate, started off well, but it was getting to Miesha on the feet, but then Miesha knocked her down, and once she got on top of her, made it a grappling match. I had no answer. So I think Pena is really aggressive, still very green, and I think her striking still pretty loose and unrefined, but I think she can make it ugly, get Eye to the ground, get on top of her, and win that way. Eye is a good striker. She's kind of nasty and aggressive herself, but I didn't like her ground game. Also against Alexis Davis, was winning that fight on the feet, but when Davis was able to get to the ground, was able to just kind of hold her down and get shots off there. So I'm going with Pena. All right, next up at heavyweight, Sean Jordan versus Ruslan Magomedov. A really fun heavyweight fight. Again, I said that I didn't think this was quite a pay-per-view worthy fight, but I'm interested in Sean Jordan. I had kind of written this guy off, had that streak where he got knocked out by Mitrione and Gonzaga back-to-back, but I think has really improved. He's fighting smarter. I think he's tightened up the defensive holes in his game. Against Cannonier, knocked him out in the first round, kind of felt him out, and then the first shot he threw put him down. And then his last fight against Derek Lewis, just styled on him, got that amazing highlight reel hook kick knockout. And his fight against Jack May also, you saw him really mix up the striking and the wrestling well. And that, I think, is going to be the key for him here is the wrestling. Magomedov, a pretty technical, high-skilled striker, especially for a heavyweight. Dominated Josh Copeland for 3 rounds with the striking and dropped Pesta a few times in his debut. Both guys have power. I think Magomedov, more calculated, better combination striker. Jordan, a little more wild. I don't like Jordan's chances if he just strikes with Magomedov, but I think he can mix it up with that wrestling, and that's where I like Jordan to win this fight. Magomedov looks pretty one-dimensional, so I'm going with Jordan, but could be close, and if Jordan can't get him down, I could definitely see Magomedov tagging him on the feet. Jordan, again, has been knocked out a few times, but I'm taking Jordan to win a decision. I think he gets it done with the wrestling. All right, next up at light heavyweight, Ryan Bader versus Rashad Evans. The return of Rashad Evans, for me, you can make an argument that Rashad Evans will lose this fight because of the very long layoff. Will be almost 2 years. But if long layoff, if he comes in just looking completely over the hill, completely debilitated, has lost all of his athleticism, I think Bader is persistent enough. He can come forward, run him into the cage, get in on his legs, get some takedowns, let his hands go more, and get the win that way. But I don't think that's very likely, and I never trust. I never want to pick a guy just because the other guy's coming off of a layoff. I mean, of course it's a factor, but with Rashad Evans, everyone said the same thing when he fought Tito Ortiz, and after he finished him, everyone said he looked better than ever. But if we're just comparing skill sets, I think Rashad Evans will just walk all over Ryan Bader, kind of similarly to the way he did against Phil Davis. You remember that fight against Phil Davis, who I think is a better wrestler than Ryan Bader and a more physical guy. Evans was just on cruise control, looked like he was fighting at 70% and was just leg tripping this guy, getting him in crucifix position and completely dominating him in the grappling. And Ryan Bader is not a good grappler at all. Good wrestler, yes, but has not gotten a submission in the UFC. He's gotten some submissions, but over real marginal guys, Vladimir Matyushenko and I think there was another guy, but just that those were off of knockdowns. Against Ovince St. Preux, how many times did he take him down over the course of 5 rounds and couldn't threaten with any submissions? Same thing against Fei Zhao, gets the takedown, but doesn't really do a whole lot with it. The fight against Anthony Perosh, just hammering this guy, had him, he should have been able to finish the fight at any point. He was just a bloody mess on the floor and couldn't finish him and didn't even attempt any submissions. So Bader's not a good grappler. If this hits the ground, I see Evans just completely schooling him. He's way more smooth with his transitions, passing, all of that. Again, the crucifix position. I see Evans having a huge grappling advantage. And more than that, Bader completely freezes up sometimes, like he did against Phil Davis, against a guy who's not a good striker. He shouldn't have felt threatened by him at all on the feet. And that fight, he just did nothing. And I thought he lost it too. Didn't go for takedowns, didn't strike much with him. It was a completely uneventful fight, and there's no reason that Phil Davis should be out of the UFC other than he's boring. I mean, if that's how you're going to justify it, okay, but merit-wise, should have won that fight against Bader. He beat Teixeira, who knocked out Bader. Bader's a tough guy, but he's just not a very high-level fighter. He's higher. He has his position in the rankings. He's higher up than he would be in another weight class. Light heavyweight is just a really weak division. And then on the feet, Evans, the fights against Little Nog and Dan Henderson, he really didn't look great. Looked kind of old and slow. Couldn't get much done with his hands. But if Evans is in top form, I think he's going to be motivated, knows he needs a big performance here to, get people's attention again. Top form, Rashad Evans, his hands, I think, are way better than Bader. Bader's kind of a stiff striker. It's improved a little bit, but still he just looks uncomfortable on the feet. And I have to go with Evans here. Just comparing skills again, I think Evans has a huge advantage. If he comes in looking old, sure, Bader, I think could get the win, but I'm going with Evans to win the decision. All right, next up at welterweight, the co-main event, Johnny Hendricks versus Tyron Woodley. Great number one contender fight. Winner should definitely fight for the title next. These are the two best guys. I think Hendricks has really kind of topped out in that first Lawler fight. Did some things better in the second fight, but the way it ended was just horrible and really disappointing to see. Came back with a win over Matt Brown, but the knockouts that he got on Campman and John Fitch, we're just not seeing that anymore. And of course, he's fighting better guys, but I don't feel he's really improved. But I see this as a big mismatch. I don't think it's going to be easy. I don't think Hendricks is going to finish Woodley, but I think it's a mismatch in the sense that it's predictable. I think Hendricks is winning a decision. Woodley, when he comes out and storms guys and has his foot on the gas, he looks great. Came out like that against Carlos Condit, knocked out Dong Hyun Kim. The Jay Huron and Josh Koscheck wins, just comes out and lets his hands go and has huge power, a huge motor. But those are not the top guys. I mean, come on, Josh Koscheck, it's impressive, but when he fights the stiffer competition, this guy totally shuts down and has a huge problem with his footwork. When he fought Rory McDonald and he was just circling with his back to the cage the entire fight, couldn't let his hands go, couldn't gain the center of the cage. I thought that was because of Rory McDonald, but then the Gastelum fight, Gastelum didn't do it as well as McDonald or as effectively. It certainly wasn't as dominant, but he did the exact same thing. Came forward, pushed him back into the cage, and it was the same thing. Woodley was fighting with his back to the fence the entire fight. And I thought he lost that Gastelum fight. I know a lot of people disagree. He had that one punch where he kind of wobbled Gastelum, but wouldn't let his hands go, got very uncomfortable. And I think the Shields fight is kind of revealing. If you go back to that a couple of years ago, it was the same thing. He just would not let his hands go against a guy who is not a dangerous striker at all. And Shields wasn't taking him down and dominated him on the ground. Woodley, I think, just completely freezes up and has terrible footwork against these guys who are smarter, intelligent, put together good game plans. Don't just go out there trying to brawl with him. And put pressure on him, mostly with the footwork. And Hendricks, I think, can definitely do that. He doesn't use as much movement as he used to, like against Campman, against John Fitch, but he does come forward. And in that second Lawler fight, he had I think it was the second round, had some good combinations. They put on Lawler, pushed him back. Lawler kind of freezed up, and Hendricks has solid boxing. More kind of fights, kind of more level-headed and more consistent with his boxing approach than Woodley, who's just either all firepower or almost no offense at all. So going with Hendricks, I also think he'll have the wrestling advantage. Woodley's more athletic, more of a physical specimen, but hasn't used his wrestling very often to dominate fights. Got the takedown on Condit, but his wins have come by these violent, quick first round finishes, and I don't see him doing that to Hendricks. Hendricks, Robbie Lawler did have Hendricks in trouble in both fights that way. Just came out of the gate, full blast, trying to finish him. But Hendricks, he circles out pretty well, doesn't stay in front of his opponents. But again, he has been fading a bit. At least in that Lawler fight, how he gassed and just would attempt takedowns, stick his head in between his legs and give up, fall to his knees, giving the dominant position to Lawler, and then he was just wailing on him from there. That was really bizarre, and to hear Hendricks justify that afterwards was also really bizarre. So I don't see Woodley coming out and just destroying Hendricks like he's done to Dong Hyun Kim and Josh Koscheck. Hendricks has the better boxing, the better combinations, and the better footwork. I see Woodley, getting stuck up against the fence again and not being able to fight in in the middle of the cage. So Hendricks for a decision. All right, next up, the main event for the light heavyweight title. Daniel Cormier versus Alexander Gustafsson. Not too much analysis here. Cormier, I think, is just going to dominate him, get him to the ground, and submit him. It's been a long time since Gustafsson has had to fight a high-level wrestler. The last time he did against Phil Davis real early in his career. Phil Davis got him to the ground and choked him out with an anaconda choke, wrapped him up. And Gustafsson is a very good fighter. I'm not trying to discredit the guy here. Obviously, he had that great performance against Jones. Really exceeded everyone's expectations. But he's a technical striker, and I don't think that's going to work here. Was not ready for that blitz from Anthony Johnson. I think Cormier can strike technically. He can also be a brawler. We've seen the more technical striking against Roy Nelson, and he brawls, with guys like Cummins, has the knockout over Bigfoot Silva. But more importantly than the striking, I think Cormier will just take down Gustafsson all day. He did defend the takedowns against Jones. Gustafsson did and got a takedown himself. But Cormier, being a shorter guy, I think he's going to have a much easier time getting in on those legs and dumping him on the ground than he did against Jones. Than Jones, an easier time than Jones had against Gustafsson. And on the feet, too, Cormier has bigger power, has those big overhands. I think he can come down the middle, and Gustafsson being the much taller guy, I think he can crack him. But I don't see Gustafsson being able to deal with that wrestling. The way that Cormier came back against Rumble Johnson was very impressive, showed that he's a high-level grappler and can overcome that storm and just impose his wrestling game. And once it was on the ground, completely beat up Johnson and beat him down until he was able to get the submission. I think he'll do the same thing against Gustafsson here. I just don't think Gustafsson has the striking, the power to threaten Cormier early. He's got a great jab, great technical boxing, but I don't see how that stops Cormier from taking him down. So Cormier by submission. All right, guys, those are my predictions for UFC 192, Cormier versus Gustafsson. Thank you for watching. Please like the video, comment, and subscribe, and I'll be back soon with my predictions for Fight Night Poirier versus Duffy, which is a great main event. I think that's going to be a great fight. Check out my predictions for Barnett versus Nelson, which still hasn't happened yet. And follow me on Twitter. My link will be in the description. See you guys next time. Thank you. Goodbye.